She immediately understands that the King and Queen have hosted the Duke and Duchess of Sussex with...
Britain thought it had seen everything. Royal weddings watched by billions. A marriage that collapsed under the weight of its own secrets. A beloved queen who carried the crown for 7 decades. A prince who walked away from everything and moved across an ocean. And a woman who spent 30 years as the most hated figure in Britain, only to become its queen. The country thought it understood the rules of the monarchy. It thought it knew how power moved through those palace corridors, how titles were granted, and how the institution protected itself from the people inside it. Then King Charles made an announcement, and the entire country stopped, not because of what happened to Camilla, not because of the royal family's internal reckoning, but because of what Charles decided about Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, and what that decision reveals about the future of the monarchy itself. This is the story the headlines missed. Stay with me, because it gets darker before it gets clearer. The quiet sun in the shadow. Before we get to the announcement, you need to understand who Tom Parker Bowles is, because most people don't. He is 49 years old. He is a food writer, a journalist, a television personality. He has spent most of his adult life operating on the comfortable fringes of royal proximity, close enough to attend state occasions, far enough to avoid the full weight of institutional scrutiny. His father is Andrew Parker Bowles, former British Army officer. His mother is Queen Camilla. His sister is Laura Lopes. And for decades, Tom existed in a fascinating no-man's land. He was the son of the most controversial woman in modern British royal history. And yet he carried none of the formal titles, none of the constitutional responsibilities, and none of the protections that came with them. He was royal adjacent, present at the coronation, present at private family gatherings, but never formally inside the structure. That was the arrangement. Until now, because when King Charles made his announcement, the same announcement that restructured Camilla's role and redrew the boundaries of royal authority, Tom Parker Bowles found himself at the center of something he had never expected to face. The question Charles put on the table was simple. It was also devastating. What role, if any, should the children of Queen Camilla play in the future of the monarchy? And the answer, when it came, left almost no room for interpretation. Think about that for a moment. A man who built his career entirely outside the institution, who never wore a uniform at a state occasion, never carried a royal title, never appeared on a balcony at Buckingham Palace, suddenly finds his future formally defined by a constitutional directive, not because of anything he did, but because of the position his mother held, the power she was perceived to wield, and the threat, however unintentional, that his proximity to that power created. That is what royal politics actually looks like beneath the pageantry. The announcement that changed everything. The palace had been operating under rising tension for months. Senior royals had gathered for constitutional briefings. Sealed folders were circulating. Advisors had surrendered their phones at the door. When Charles finally made his formal declaration, reducing Camilla's public role, restructuring her ceremonial position, placing her household appointments under the sovereign's central authority, the country understood that something seismic had shifted. But here is what the news coverage largely missed. Buried inside the constitutional restructuring was a secondary clause, a directive, a statement that addressed not only Camilla's future, but the formal standing of her children in relation to the monarchy. Charles had been advised, and the advice came from multiple directions, that the ambiguity surrounding Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes could no longer continue. Why? Because Camilla's reduced role created an institutional vacuum, and vacuums in royal politics are never left empty for long. They are filled by influence, by proximity, or by the people who know how to exploit both. The question was not whether Camilla's children would try to fill that vacuum. The question was whether the palace would define their position before someone else did. Charles chose to define it, and his decision stunned the family. What Charles decided, and why it matters. The king's directive on Tom Parker Bowles was not a punishment. It was not a dismissal, but it was unmistakably a boundary. Parker Bowles would no longer have informal access to palace scheduling systems, ceremonial planning briefings, or household coordination meetings. The quiet, unspoken proximity he had maintained, attending select royal events, consulting with Camilla's office, operating in that gray zone between private family and public institution, was being formally closed. The directive did not change his relationship with his mother. Charles was explicit on this point. Tom Parker Bowles remained Camilla's son. That bond was beyond the reach of constitutional instruction. But the gray zone was gone. This matters more than it sounds, because the gray zone was never just social access. It was information access. It was the ability to know in advance what the royal calendar held. 2. Understand which patronages were under pressure. To maintain relationships with figures inside the institution who would not have spoken to an outsider. Remove the gray zone, and you remove a form of informal power that does not appear in any official document, but has shaped decisions inside royal circles for generations. Ask yourself this. In an institution built on tradition, precedent, and the management of perception, what is informal access actually worth? The answer is everything. And Charles just revoked it. There is a reason this particular decision landed so heavily inside palace walls. Everyone who works in royal service understands the unspoken architecture of access. They understand that the person who reads the draft schedule before it is finalized, who sits in the room when patronages are being discussed, who receives the courtesy phone call before a public announcement, that person holds real power. Not formal power, not titled power, but the kind of power that accumulates quietly over years, until it is simply assumed to belong there. That assumption is what Charles dismantled, and he did it in writing. Why now? The 3 pressures that forced Charles's hand. To understand why this happened when it did, you need to understand 3 converging pressures inside the palace. Each one alone might have been manageable. Together, they created a crisis that demanded resolution. The first pressure was William. The Prince of Wales has spent the last 3 years accelerating his preparation for kingship. His household has grown in size and sophistication. His public profile has expanded. His relationships with key institutional figures, within the Church of England, within Parliament, within the military establishment, have deepened considerably. William had watched the ambiguity around Camilla's household with increasing unease, not because he distrusted Tom Parker Bowles personally, but because institutional ambiguity always benefits those who exploit it and harms those who respect the rules. He raised the issue with his father, not aggressively, but directly. The future king wanted clarity, and he was not willing to wait indefinitely for it. The second pressure was Anne. Princess Anne has functioned, for much of the last decade, as the monarchy's institutional memory. She remembers what worked under the Queen. She understands what is different now, and she is not sentimental about the distinction between personal loyalty and institutional necessity. Anne had documented concerns, not rumors, documents. Records of coordination between Camilla's household and ceremonial planners that had not been sanctioned by the Central Sovereign Office. Records of communication patterns that suggested Camilla's network was operating, in some respects, independently of the king's direct authority. Whether Tom Parker Bowles was directly involved in any of this is not confirmed. But his proximity to Camilla's operation meant that removing informal access was inseparable from addressing the broader structural problem. The third pressure came from outside the family entirely, from the advisors who managed the monarchy's public standing and who had watched the tension between Camilla's household and William's household become increasingly visible to a press corps hungry for exactly this kind of story. The palace's institutional reputation rests on the appearance of unity. The moment that appearance fractures, the moment the press senses a genuine fault line, the coverage shifts from ceremonial deference to forensic examination. Charles moved before the fracture became public. Camilla's response, and what it tells us about Tom. When Camilla received the news about the directive affecting her son, her reaction was not what the palace expected. She did not argue. She did not threaten. She did not make demands. She asked for a private meeting with Charles, alone, with no advisors present, and what she said in that meeting, drawn from palace accounts that have since circulated among senior household staff, was more revealing than any public statement could have been. Camilla told her husband that Tom had never asked for access, had never sought proximity for personal gain, had, in her account, simply been present in the way that any child is present in their parent's life, available, concerned, emotionally invested. Charles listened to all of it. Then he said something that cut through every defense Camilla had offered. The problem, he told her, was not Tom's intentions. It was the structure that his presence, however well-intentioned, had created. Intent and consequence are two different things in constitutional monarchy. The institution is not managed by what people mean. It is managed by what people can see and what can be used. Camilla understood, and her silence in the weeks that followed was, in its own way, the clearest confirmation that the directive stood. But here is the question that keeps surfacing among royal observers. If Tom Parker Bowles' proximity to the palace was genuinely benign, why was it significant enough to require a formal constitutional directive to close? That question does not have a comfortable answer. Consider also what this moment means for Camilla as a mother. She spent decades fighting for acceptance, for herself, for her place beside Charles, for her right to be recognized as his partner without apology. She endured the hatred. She endured the comparisons. She endured the years when simply walking into a public space meant bracing for hostility. And she brought her children through all of that. She watched Tom and Laura grow up in the long shadow of the most controversial royal relationship of the 20th century, to now watch her son formally pushed to the outer edge of the institution she had fought so hard to enter. That is a wound that no constitutional directive can properly describe. And Charles knew it. He signed the order anyway. What this means for the Winds or succession. Step back from the personal drama for a moment and look at the structural picture. Because what Charles has done here, and this is the part that deserves more attention than it is getting, is draw the succession line in permanent ink. The royal family is not, in constitutional terms, Camilla's family. It is the House of Windsor, and the House of Windsor has one clear succession: Charles, then William, then George, then Charlotte, then Louis. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, are not part of that line. They carry no royal titles. They have no constitutional standing. Their proximity to the monarchy has always been a function of their mother's relationship with Charles, not of any formal institutional position. By issuing a directive that formally defines the limits of that proximity, Charles has done something subtle but enormously significant. He has prevented the creation of a parallel court, an informal network of influence operating in the name of, and potentially on behalf of, the Queen Consort, that could complicate William's path to the throne. This is not hypothetical. It has happened before. Royal history is full of examples of informal networks forming around a monarch's closest relationships, creating competing centers of influence that destabilize the institution for years or decades. Charles, advised by people who understand that history, moved to prevent it before it took root. The message to Tom Parker Bowles was not personal. It was constitutional. Your mother is the Queen Consort. That position has now been restructured, and the informal access that came with it, in any form, ends here. The media moment, and what Britain is actually debating. By the time the announcement filtered through to the broader public, it had already been reframed by the press. The television coverage focused, naturally, on Camilla, on her reduced role, on the drama of the declaration, on the symbolism of the empty ceremonial chair. The image of hundreds of people standing outside Buckingham Palace in silence, watching a flag above a household transformed overnight, became the defining visual of the crisis. But in the quieter corners of the coverage, in the constitutional analysis, in the long-form journalism, in the conversations happening in Westminster and legal chambers, a different question was being asked. Had Charles just established a precedent? Because the directive about Tom Parker Bowles was not, technically, about Tom Parker Bowles. It was about the principle that informal proximity to the monarchy, regardless of the relationship that creates it, carries constitutional implications that cannot be left undefined. And if that principle applies to Camilla's children, it applies everywhere. It applies to the spouses of royal family members who are not themselves working royals. It applies to the households of princes and princesses who operate semi-independently of the central sovereign office. It applies, potentially, to the complex web of relationships that surround the monarchy at every level. Charles did not set out to rewrite constitutional convention. He set out to resolve a specific crisis involving a specific woman and her specific children. But the instrument he used, the formal directive, issued through the constitutional secretary, irreversible without a new instruction, has implications far beyond the immediate situation. Britain is not just debating whether Charles was right to reduce Camilla's role. It is debating whether the monarchy just demonstrated that it can police its own, and whether that is a sign of institutional health or institutional ruthlessness. What do you think? Is this the monarchy protecting itself, or is it a husband making a devastating choice in the name of an institution that will outlast him? Drop your answer in the comments, because this is a conversation Britain needs to have out loud. William's calculation. And what comes next? William has said nothing publicly. His household has issued no statements. His team has followed the instruction, given privately, clearly and firmly, not to treat any of this as victory. But the Prince of Wales is not a passive figure in this story. He never was. The directive on Tom Parker Bowles resolves, at least structurally, a problem that William identified and raised. The restructuring of Camilla's ceremonial role accelerates Catherine's transition into the principal female position within the working royal family. The seating crisis at Windsor, the incident with the chair, the altered cards, the recorded palace account, has been formally documented, addressed, and closed. William got clarity. He got structure. He got, in the most formal terms available, confirmation that the line of succession is exactly what it appears to be, and that no informal network will be permitted to blur it. But William also understands something that the coverage has not fully grasped. He will be king, and Camilla will still be there. She will still be his father's wife. She will still be a presence within the institution, diminished but not removed. The children she has will still be the children of the woman his father chose. No directive changes that arithmetic. No constitutional instruction rewrites the emotional history between a stepmother and the boy who lost his mother on a Paris road in 1997. William has never spoken about that history in any detail. He never will. But it lives inside every calculation he makes, and it will be present in every room he shares with Camilla for the rest of both their lives. The directive resolves the structural problem. It does not resolve the human reality. And when William eventually takes the throne, the question of what role, if any, Camilla, Tom, and Laura play in the life of the new royal household will return, not in a constitutional context, but in the inevitable, complicated, deeply human context of a family that has to keep finding ways to exist in the same rooms. William is already thinking about this. The people around him are already planning for it. The question is whether the framework Charles built, the directive, the restructured roles, the formal boundary, will hold when the throne passes and the variables change entirely. Because here is the truth about royal precedent. It is powerful until it becomes inconvenient, and the definition of inconvenient changes with every generation. The morning after, what remains? Charles returned to his private apartments after the first public appearances under the new order. Camilla was there. No officials, no formal agenda. The announcement had been made. The directive had been issued. The coverage was running on every channel in Britain. Behaved. He sat beside her. She took his hand. Their love had survived scandal, hatred, public rejection, and the judgment of a country that spent decades deciding whether they deserved to be together. It had survived a coronation that millions had watched with complicated feelings. It had survived the shadow of Diana, which never fully lifts. Whether it would survive this, whether the weight of constitutional responsibility could coexist with the intimacy of a marriage, remained the most human question inside the most institutional story in Britain. And it was a question that no advisor, no constitutional secretary, and no sealed palace folder could answer. Only the two people sitting in that room knew the truth of it, and neither of them was talking. Tom Parker Bowles has not spoken publicly. He is not expected to. The directive defined a boundary, and the boundary has been accepted. But the questions it raises are not going away. What does it mean to be the child of a queen consort whose public role has been reduced? What does it mean to be formally removed from proximity to an institution your mother helped to shape? What does it mean to watch a parent navigate power at the highest possible level, and to understand, suddenly, that the gray zone you occupied was never really yours to keep? Tom Parker Bowles does not have royal titles. He does not have constitutional standing. He has now a formal definition of exactly where the institution's boundary lies. And outside that boundary, he has a life, a career, a mother who still loves him, and a stepfather who made one of the most consequential decisions of his reign, partly because of the structure Tom's presence had, however unintentionally, created. The final word. The monarchy changed on the day Charles signed that declaration, not because of the drama, or the press coverage, or the image of Camilla watching from a distance as Catherine took her ceremonial place. It changed because Charles demonstrated to his family, to his advisors, and to the country watching that the crown answers to the succession, not to love, not to loyalty, not to 30 years of a marriage that survived everything the world could throw at it. The throne, he told Camilla in the king's study, was never created to prove their love. He was right, and he was also paying a price that no formal declaration could fully account for. Camilla still has her dignity. She still has her husband. She still has her children, her life, her history. But Tom Parker Bowles, who never asked to be at the center of this, now exists at a formally defined distance from an institution that shaped his entire life. And the question of whether that distance is fair is one that Britain is only beginning to ask. The crown survives. The marriage endures. The succession is clear. And somewhere in a private residence, a woman who fought the world to reach a throne she can no longer fully occupy holds a photograph of the man who took it from her and decides every single day whether love is still enough. If this story left you with questions, it should. The monarchy never gives you all the answers. It gives you pageantry, protocol, and just enough truth to keep you watching. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel does not traffic in rumor. We follow the power, we follow the decisions, and we follow the people caught in the space between what the crown demands and what the heart can bear. Subscribe so you don't miss the next development, because in the royal family, it is always only a matter of time before the next sealed folder arrives at someone's door.